Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of Mastering Dungeons. I am Sean Merwin, here with Teos Abadia to talk with you about everything good and just with D&D in the world. Hey, Teos, how's it going?
It's going great in D&D land.
Yes, in D&D land, everything is
I
wonderful.
I love escaping to a fantasy realm.
Yes,
Let's
yes.
do that together, everybody.
Yeah, we are going to forego any other discussion, and we are going to get right into the D&D this week. And we're going to start by talking about where D&D is going in the Neverwinter MMO, because sometimes where Neverwinter goes, D&D follows. So you want to tell us about this, Teos?
Yeah, so Neverwinter just out of nowhere completely. I don't think anybody had this, had a money on this, which is that the Neverwinter MMO is going to go back to the Feywild, to a realm that was actually their first expansion ever way back in 2013 called Sharandar. And Sharandar's tied to Neverwinter lore. It is the kind of elven kingdom that was sort of sometimes in parts of it, or an echo of it, a form of it is in our plane and in the Neverwinter Wood, and part of it is in the Feywild. And it's a fine campaign, and everybody can still play it. It's all there and live. And they said we're relaunching it, and that immediately caused people to go like, "Why?"
Hmm.
That seems like a really bizarre thing to do. It works just fine. Like, why would you relaunch this and reimagine this? And why would this be sort of your big February release? But indeed, it is. So it made people think, including me, is this where we're going?
Hmm. So we have a link to that information in our show notes. So is that where we're going, or are we going to Dragonlance? Because Amazon UK, Amazon being a terrific spoiler for all things D&D,
Indeed.
put up a page announcing a Dragonlance 1 offering with a release date of July 29th, my birthday. Uh, and it's for a novel that will be 304 pages and released in paperback. No other description was given for this upcoming novel other than it was written by the original Dragonlance authors, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. And that is up on a link in our show notes at comicbook.com, that information. And there has been some rumblings about Dragonlance for the last few months. There was a lawsuit about, are they going to release a novel or aren't they? All these things. So we have some Feywild information. We have some Dragonlance information. So
This is super interesting on a number of levels. But first, I have to start with my joke that when I saw Dragonlance 1, I just assumed that I was going to get a Dragonlance.
mhm.
And it was going to be like an inch size, or
Right.
what is the unit of measurement? But no, it's a novel.
Right.
And then that immediately brings up the fascinating question of, is this a re-release of the novel, maybe like updated for today, a re-envisioned Dragonlance world? Is it, I don't know, chapter 4000, because there are so many
Yeah.
Dragonlance books? Is this some new era? Like, that is going to be fascinating to hear what this actually is. Like, where is it
Right.
taking us in Dragonlance?
And a lot of this is being thrown about now because there was an announcement. I don't have the link right in front of me, that the next D&D book would be revealed in the next couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, there
So
was a mention of that. And last year, we of course saw that I think it was Ray Weininger said that there would be several, going back to several, two or three, I forget the exact number, but some various settings of old would be revisited in some manner.
right.
And does this count, or is this novel? I mean, one would think it's backing this up. You also have to take into account that a huge Dragonlance fan is Joe Manganiello,
Hmm.
and D&D Wizards of the Coast has loved to tie itself to him in various ways, putting his characters in official books, all kinds of things like that. So and he has apparently written a script for a
Right.
Dragonlance movie.
Yep.
He, talks to Margaret Weiss all the time, or has at various times talked about talking to her. At one point, somebody said, and I couldn't verify this, but that he sort of said something like, I have in my hand stats for Draconians.
Right.
So there's just so much interesting
Yeah.
conjecture, and,
Yeah.
but yeah, so where are we going? Which can only tell us that we're going to Spelljammer.
Exactly. Because Bellspread confirmed.
Confirmed.
There we go. And last but not least, for our news section, we have Max Mini, WizKids, sharing info on their massive Tower and Papercraft.
Yeah, so they did two different things that they released. One was, and these were videos that they shared through YouTube, where they walk through them. One of them is the tower. So this tower is I mean, it's unbelievable. It's a 3-level tower that is made of pre-painted plastic. It's enormous. Like if you hold the box, it's almost your size. It's this unbelievably gargantuan thing. And when you build it and put it together, it's this really very large 3-story tower. It has cardboard floors, which they've used before on things like their ship. One side gridded, the other one not. Plastic stairs on every level to sort of join the levels together. A dome top that's very beautiful, resin sculpted exterior, cool features like a ring of sort of praying priests. That's the kind of the decoration on the battlements. Really nice features. It has a high price, as one would expect for something like this, $250.
Yeah.
One thing that's cool is you can pop out the walls to make it look ruined. And the hilarious thing is I had not seen all these details until now. And this tower is absolutely perfect down to the holes for something that I turned in at the end of last year as a writing assignment. So I was talking to the people in charge of the project saying, like, this is like 100% the tower. Like, it's too perfect. So once that piece is fully released, I'll have to point everybody out to this tower where for $250 you can truly reproduce it in 3D.
That's funny. And what about the papercraft part of this news?
Yeah, they gave out some papercraft early samples. They have 2 different papercraft buildings. We talked about it very briefly earlier in the show. Excuse me. One of them is the lodge, which is a single building, $16 because it's made of paper. And then the other one is these 10 towns, a set of 3 buildings that are $30. And I thought, this is just going to be an exterior colored cardboardy paper, glossy, and it is that. But you can actually take off the sides and play inside of the buildings.
Wow.
And they actually are a very nice size. Like they're big. They sit high up off the table, so they kind of have a commanding, impressive presence when you plop them on your table. And then you can explore inside. The videos said kind of made them look a little hard to put together. And you can't quite get a feel for the space inside from the videos that I saw. So I'm excited to get my hands on these. I think for the price, this seems like, now that I've seen it, this looks really reasonable.
Yeah, it's funny. One of our backers, the old school DM Randy Farmer, makes beautiful papercraft, and we actually interviewed him on the show. It must have been 2 or 3 years ago. And talked all about papercraft and how easy it would be to sell it. Have some of these big companies that deal with minis and terrain put together something and sell, and how useful it would be. And now a couple of years later, we're starting to see it come out. So it'll be interesting to see how it's received by the fans who use such things for quality, for usability, and so on.
Yeah, Randy Farmer's work is amazing. There's also a cardboard GM on Twitter that makes things out of just plain cardboard. It looks really awesome.
Wow.
And there are some companies that sell them, but they're not as high quality as what WizKids is sort of bringing that I've seen. And they're print your own, of course. But so this is really neat. We'll see what it does industry-wise.
Yep. So now we are going to get into our Tasha's Cauldron of Everything review segment, where we are going to talk about the Druid. We covered the cleric last week. Now it's time to bring the nature and see what is in store for the Druid in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So first, let's talk about the optional features that are provided for the Druid. The first are additional spells. And as we often say, there sure are more spells you can take.
Yeah.
And that's fine. If there's a problem with a spell, it should fix the spell, not who has access to it. So there's usually
the biggest pick here is that Cone of Cold is a hard-hitting spell for its level.
True.
And so that's on the list, but otherwise everything seems pretty. There's a lot of sort of fiery stuff and some summoning and
Right. Things that druids do, elemental summoning sorts of things. And the Wild Companion is the next optional feature. This is the big one to talk about because it allows you to use one of your wild shape abilities, and instead of wild shaping, you cast a Find Familiar spell with a time limit of 1 hour per every 2 levels. And there's a few subtle changes, like the time limit. the fact that it's considered a fey creature, and otherwise it's pretty much just exactly like the Find Familiar spell with a limited duration. And I think this is great. I think this is exactly how rules should work. Take an existing rule, use it to fit the theme that you're going for. It fits the Druid theme very nicely, this sort of summoning nature spirits. It's not overpowered, and all together, flavor, fun, and theme, and balanced. I love it.
Yeah, this is super cool. This is maybe the first of these optional new features that I say this could have been core.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I and I think it's so new player friendly. Like it's exactly what a player when they envision being a druid, right? Like, well, can't I just like have a bird come to me or any kind of creature? Like, yes, you can. Here's how. Right?
Yes, you can.
Great.
This is exactly
Love
what
it.
you do, and this is how you do it, and boom, it's done. And the final optional feature, which you get at 4th level, is cantrip versatility, which is the same as all the other spellcasting classes, where once you come to a point where you can raise your ability score, you can also switch out a cantrip for another cantrip. So with that, we will check out the first subclass, which is called the Circle of Spores. Originally found in the Dungeon Master's Guide to Ravnica, this subclass talks about beauty and decay, where mold and other fungi transform lifeless material into abundant, albeit somewhat strange, new forms of life. Life and death are part of a cycle, with one leading to the other and back again. Death isn't the end of life, but instead a change of state that sees life shift into a new form.
This is
So let's
perfect because you're such a fun guy. So
yes, it's nothing like death and fun guys. So
yeah, this is the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. This was a perfect fit because you have the Golgari Swarm
Mhm.
green deck kind of side
Yeah,
that is all about this sort of decay and things like that. Yeah, I love the concept, and I think when this was first released back then, a lot of people were like, "Oh, this looks just incredible," and I
right.
do love the theme of this.
Yeah, I mean the theme is very, very strong, and it takes the druid and does something that a lot of people were doing without needing the subclass. Is sort of saying, well, druids are nature, there is some decay in nature, so let me make a decay druid. And they would, I'm talking all the way back to like first edition,
Sure.
they would find a way to make a druid themed in this way. And now, through the beauty of all of the rules incarnations up until 5th edition and including 5th edition, we now have ways to do it right within the rules. So at 2nd level, you get your circle spells, and mine's always a shoulder shrug with you. Okay, yep, have some more spells, but you want to say a little bit about this, Tavis.
Yeah, just Chill Touch is always a strong cantrip. It has a very 120-foot range, which is great, and it does D8 damage and necrotic, which is usually pretty good. Animate Dead's on this list, and I recently was having a conversation with a DM who was sort of saying, Animate Dead can be such a pain at my table. What do you do about it? How do you control it? And I think any kind of summoning spell falls into that category where it can be sort of abused. And that in this being on the spell list here, it can stack with the features and become a bit of a problem. So it's something for both players and DMs to keep an eye out on.
For sure. So at 2nd level, you also get your first real ability for the Circle of Spores, which is called Halo of Spores. So when a creature you can see moves into a space within 10 feet of you or starts its turn there, you can use your reaction to deal 1d4 necrotic damage to that creature unless it succeeds on a Constitution saving throw. The necrotic damage that this does increases to a d6 at 6th, a d8 at 10th, and then a d10 at 14th. And it pushes the boundaries for me of something that could be too much, but I think it's okay.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
It's a bit on the edge of being, is this worth the time we're taking, right? And
Yep.
that it's my reaction, so I can only do it once. But when something comes close to me, it hits my halo, and I maybe deal, D6, D4 damage to it, or maybe nothing.
Right.
And just, is it worth that time? Or should the feature have been something that I can for sure do and do fewer times? It still represents this. I don't know. I'm okay. Like you said, I am also okay with this, but it's on that edge.
Yeah.
It certainly conveys the theme, and I like that about it.
Yeah, it conveys the theme well, because one thing to keep in mind too is that this halo is always there. It's not something that you need to summon. This halo is always around you. The reaction is just to cause it to do damage. And it took me a minute to wrap my mind around that, especially when we get into the future abilities that rely on this. So that's something thematically it works, right? There's death all around us.
Super cool.
And I like that. So at
Swirling
level
spores. That's
yes. At level 2, you also get symbiotic entity, where as an action you can expend a use of your wild shape to awaken the spores around you rather than transforming into beast form. When you do this, you gain 4 temporary hit points for each level you have in your druid class. And while this feature is active, you gain the following benefits. When you deal the damage from Halo of Spores, you can roll the damage die a second time and add it. So basically roll 2d4 or 2d6 when you do the damage. Your melee weapon attack deals an extra 1d6 necrotic damage to any target that you hit. And the benefits last for 10 minutes until you lose all your temporary hit points that you gain by this ability, or until you use your wild shape again. So this just sort of it lets you embolden this circle of spores around you to do some more things with it.
Yeah, tactically, this is fairly huge in that, you know, if you think of wild shape, the way players will often use it is as a sort of hit point machine, right?
Yep.
Transform into form, attack. The attacks are usually pretty good, but you get a whole bunch of hit points, bad armor class, and when you finally die, you don't care about those hit points you lost unless there's any spillover, and so you're totally fine, and you just can do it again and again. Here, 4 temporary hit points for each level. That is a big boost. Like 5th level, 20 extra hit points.
Yeah.
It's a lot like having wild shape form, and then you get these other benefits, a boost to your damage. And though I'm generally not a big fan of adding damage to what I think of as spell casting classes, you know, we see this in the cleric where it's sort of like, ooh, another d6 with your mace, and it's like, well, I never use my mace, you know.
Right.
But here, the druid has always had these spells like shillelagh and, you know, some sort of fire scimitar thing, and so it actually can stack up a fair bit to where it is a pretty strong attack, and so it's a nice alternative to the kind of beast wild shape that we see so often.
The one thing that's a little unclear and that adds a little bit too much complication is that second bullet about your melee weapon attacks deal an extra d6 necrotic damage to any target they hit. As soon as you start throwing around pronouns, you have to sometimes clarify. So at first I thought, who was they? And
the weapons, the person.
The weapon attacks, but I thought it meant the spores. Right. So at first I thought it was the spores. If the spores do damage, then you do an extra d6. If you hit that, and I'm like, but that doesn't make any sense, because then you'd have to track who's been hit by your spores, and so it should just say your melee weapon attacks deal an extra d6 to crack damage to any weapons, to any target hit by your attacks or something. Just
one thing that's the other thing. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's for sure. I'm also struck by the benefit of all of this kind of package that you get at second level lasts 10 minutes, huge long time, or until you lose those temporary hit points, or until you use wild shape again. Losing your temporary hit points could be, they might last all day, or they might be gone the next round.
Right.
And that's fascinating, right? So you really have low control over how long this lasts.
And I like that. I think that's a benefit, not a drawback of that, for sure. At level 6, you get fungal infestation. If a beast or humanoid that is small or medium dies within 10 feet of you, you can use your reaction to animate it, causing it to stand up immediately with 1 hit point. It uses the zombie stat block in the monster manual. It remains animate for 1 hour, after which it collapses and dies. And then all the same riders kind of come with the things we've already seen about having something, a companion or some assistant, where you can tell it what to do with mental commands. If you don't, it will only take the dodge action.
Here, attack.
Or I'm sorry, attack action. And then and you can use this feature a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier, and you regain all expended uses after a long rest. Well, if your wisdom modifier is 4, that could be 4 zombies walking around with you for an hour, plus cast animate dead, plus have a familiar, plus this is where it can get a little bit much. It can get a little bit much at low levels, not to mention high levels.
Yep. One thing is I wish it didn't remain for an hour. I wish this was sort of in the combat versus create an army that follows you around. If it was, for a few rounds or something like that, I think that would actually work way better, and it would be more fun if it was something more like old school D&D where it's like, lasts 2d4 rounds or something like that. Like, I think that would be a lot more fun for DMs especially, but just even for the party. Rooms, and we saw this in Rime, right? Rime has these very small rooms that we talked about. When you throw in a few summoned monsters, just spaces get clogged and the game bogs down in so many ways.
Yeah. And there's other points of friction too in games that I always, as a designer, try to eliminate. And that point of friction is that last 10 minutes, last 20 minutes, last an hour. Because then it becomes, well, how long did this take? Well, did you search the bodies? Well, yeah, we searched the bodies after the last combat, but that only took a minute, right? Well, no, it took 20 minutes. Well, why did it take 20 minutes? Right. And that's just another point of friction that can slow a game down and cause hard feelings and take you out of the sort of storytelling. That's why I either want something to be, I don't want it to be a set duration unless it's very short, like a minute. I want it to be until a short rest, until a long rest, until something that can't be argued about. For sure that that's when it ends.
Yeah.
At level 10, you get spreading spores. As a bonus action, while your symbiotic entity feature is active, you can hurl spores up to 30 feet away, where they swirl in a 10-foot cube for 1 minute. The spores disappear early if you use this feature again, if you dismiss them as a bonus action, or if your symbiotic entity feature is no longer active. Now we've crossed over into, yes, this is very cool, but there's too many numbers and too many times being thrown around.
My daughter is practicing to take the ACT. Okay. And this could honestly be like a quiz there.
It could.
If a druid starting 60 feet away from you hurls spores,
Right. So now the spores are not just around you in a circle, but now you can throw them away but you're not really throwing them away because they're still around you, but they're also in this 10-foot cube up to 30 feet away. Now your symbiotic entity lasts for a certain amount of time, but this spreading spores also lasts a certain amount of time that you need to keep track of. Okay. Now when does it go away? Well, all right, so when does symbiotic entity go away? Well, we have to go back and refer to that to figure out when this might go away. It becomes a little too much. Thematically cool, fun, I would say so, but complex, a little much.
Yeah, and on the fun side, one problem that I have is features that have a low chance of being pulled off the way you want. Right. And so if I am trying to protect the hallway, this is amazing. Right. I get to put this thing in there, and anything that goes through is going to take my Halo of Spores damage. And if I stand in front of them, they must sit there soaking it up. That becomes a just death zone. Super effective. But if I'm in the middle of, the temple that we're trying to stop the ritual in, and I just choose a 10-foot area and I plunk down this cube, why would any monster go through it?
Right.
But I'm going to want monsters to go through it. And my DM sort of feels like they have to, be happy, make you happy, or that they're being mean if nobody falls for it. But it's this weird gas cube. Why would you ever enter it? Right.
Right.
And so then it's zero effective.
Right.
I prefer that I would have preferred had this been a bit more like the Essentials design for the Hunter Ranger in 4E, which had these sort of snares you could put in that you just designate a square. When something steps in it, it goes off. And that is more likely to happen because they can't see it. Yep. 5e has something like that too. Just a little more where it would have just given you some amount of tactic and payoff and then go away versus having to be I don't know, tracked in this way.
Yeah, and I can understand the thought behind it, right? The thought behind it is, well,
Sure.
what if this player wants to play a druid that stands back and doesn't get up into combat? Well, then their spores are going to be less powerful, so we need to give them a range on it. And that makes sense because they actually throw the rider in while this cube of spores, the spreading spores cube, persists. You can't use your halo of spores reaction. So now you're taking something away that, again, you have to remember that if something rushes you, you can't say, okay, oh, I do that. Oh, wait, that's up. It's just one more thing to keep track of.
Yeah.
And at level 14, you get fungal body. It sounds like college all over again. You can't be blinded, deafened, frightened, or poisoned, and any critical hit against you counts as a normal hit unless you are incapacitated. So you're basically turning into a giant mushroom. Congratulations.
Yeah. One of the things I love about this is the fact that it is a very simple thing.
Yes.
After all that complexity, very good call on the designers to make the level 14 just be a bunch of immunities kind of things to conditions. That's great. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's strong, that's neat, and it does communicate that, And one of the things I can think of when you're making a subclass, if you look at the chapter headers, the power names, and they really kick butt on the theme, you're doing well, right? And this is, halo of spores, symbiotic entity, fungal infestation, spreading spores, and fungal body. Yeah, good job.
Yep. Yeah.
Pretty good.
I agree. Next week, we will look at the last two subclasses, the Circle of Stars and the Circle of Wildfire. But now we are going to get into the freezing cold of Icewind Dale. We've actually zipped through chapter 3 and 4, one per week for the last 2 weeks. And now we are going to try to do the same with chapter 5 called Destruction's Light. You want to give us a recap of chapter 4, Teos?
Yeah, so chapter 4 was all about the dragon devastating the 10 towns. We're told that we can take the time we need to finish up any plot threads we have, and we should reach level 7. At which point, Veline, who is this member of the Arcane Brotherhood, comes to us and gives us her quest. And we talked about this last time, and it's worth saying again that I think it is very important story-wise to give the characters things to do in the devastated towns, to have some stake in the game, to feel like they're tied to the fate of 10 towns, like it all matters. Be part of those rebuilding efforts, right? Show the damage that took place due to the Dwergar. But when you reach 7th and all these conditions are met, Veline shows up. And one of the things that's very interesting is we're giving a lot of information of what she knows, and most of it says that she's reluctant to share this.
Right.
I'm not super a fan of that.
Yeah.
Because it's always hard. The DM wants to share these things because they're cool, juicy tidbits. But okay. And so the main thing is she wants help reaching Yithrin, the lost flying city of the Empire of Netheril. Depending on how things have gone, the players have probably heard some word that this thing is out there. She, or the Arcane Brotherhood, used divination magic and learned its location under the Ragged Glacier. And it is behind, sort of the easiest way to get to it would be a former waterfall that has frozen solid. And if one could get through it, one could then reach the other side in the city. The city is worth finding for the Arcane Brotherhood because it flies. The way it flies is through an incredibly powerful piece, artifact that is known as a Mythalar. And this is the kind of thing that powers Myth Draenor and other famous Forgotten Realms cities. And one little tidbit thrown in is it could perhaps allow you to control the weather. And before they set out to this place, Veline wants to find two things. One is the Codicil of White. This is sort of the must find. It's a book written by Oral's followers. There's some nice lore touch here because it came from Dragon Magazine and kind of old artifact that was written up. In it is a spell that can carve a passage to the city. And Veline says this book is held in a frost giant fortress named Grimscale in the Sea of Moving Ice. again, being sort of vague, the book tells us that Valine knows that this will draw Aural's attention and that it's actually Aural's current home.
Yep.
Which is quite the omission.
Yeah.
And then there's this Professor Orb.
Yeah, the Professor Orb is it's an orb that was possessed by one of the other members of the Arcane Brotherhood, and it has basically knowledge within it that is needed to find and traverse the Lost City. So both of these things are necessary steps in your sort of goal now, maybe, to find this Lost City. But what is your goal?
Yeah, that is the hardest part here, that I think that could have used some reworks and development, kind of after everything's turned in and you look at the project and you go, okay, what's going on here? Because, why would I want to help a Necromancer Arcane Brotherhood member find this city? Like, the last thing I want is the Arcane Brotherhood. Like, a convincing plot to me is stop the Arcane Brotherhood from reaching the Netherese Lost City and getting their hands on it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That is a convincing adventure plot. Right. And yet I'm supposed to help her. And there isn't a lot to say that there's anything in it for me, except this maybe the Mythalar could use to control the weather.
Yeah. And that's only if you can A, find it, B, survive the Arcane Brotherhood trying to kill you for it. But the interesting thing is that the characters can, even though they might not be fully aware of it, stop the curse by going to this island and this giant fortress. So that might be where you want to put the focus as the DM, because that gives them a compelling reason to go. And, in that sense, the Arcane Brotherhood member, Velen, can be an asset rather than a super suspicious character.
Well, or even you lead into that, but she's got you because she knows where this codicil is, but right. You have aligned interests, right? Like, if I think, sometimes it's fun to think of something like, how would Chris Perkins run this, right? If I'm imagining like a live play where he's playing Valine, or Jeremy Crawford is running Valine, and it would be this sort of obvious, like, yeah, I know you don't like me, you don't like how I'm a necromancer who animates kobolds, but you know what I do know? I know how to stop the Rime.
Right.
Exactly. Here's why we should, and so the players just want to take her out, but they got to go with it for now. That could have worked better, and I find there's just the other thing is the players don't have to actually go with her, but it doesn't say so in chapter 4 or early on in chapter 5. It then later in chapter 5 begins to say if they're with Valine, if they're not.
Yeah.
But it's sort of not mentioned early enough, and so that's another important thing is if they don't like her. They have the knowledge they need. Hey, find this city, and they can go off, or find this former fortress, and they can go off and find that on their own. Yeah. Interestingly, the thing it does not say is what Valine does about it if they are going off without them. Apparently, in chapter 5, she doesn't do anything; she just lets them have at it.
Yeah. So you'll have to keep that in mind as a DM about how you want to play it, what your players would respond to, what form of push they might need to get them to go there, assuming that you want them to go there at this point. And probably if they are 7th level, it is time for them to go there. So
yeah, one last thing I would say is that there is Caer Dineval, the 10 town, has the quest in it where you can go into the Caer, and one of the things you can meet there is another Arcane Brotherhood member named Avarice, albino tiefling, and we talked about her when we reviewed this section, where she will not actually fight the characters. She's fairly powerful at that time, but she's watching them all this time through these gargoyles that she has. And so another option is, if you still want them to have somebody to guide them, Avarice could show up trying to act like the better of two evils.
Right.
And that's another possibility.
Yeah. So let's talk about the actual chapter. So you want to be the character should be 7th level. When they do go to there are different milestones they can hit to gain another level. They can first kill the rock that the that Oriel uses to, I was going to say Avatar of Oriel, but she's not an Avatar. It's actually Oriel. That Oriel uses to fly over Icewind Dale to renew this curse every evening or every morning. And which is strange. It's not strange that you gain a level because that's a milestone. Because if you kill the rock, the adventure says, "Oh, curse is over. She can't do anything about it now." And I did a double take, and I actually read that passage about 4 times and said, "Did I miss something?" This although she's mortal, she still is a god. She can't just fly herself over and cast the spell,
or any other
find a griffin.
Mount.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. It's bizarre.
And I don't know why players, it's one thing to assume it at the story level, but then to not think that players are going to go, well, I don't care if I killed her mount. She'll just get another, she can sequester a griffin from the Goliaths. Like any number of flying creatures exist. Why?
Yeah.
This is one of the strangest parts of this adventure, I think, is that idea that to stop the Rime, all you must do if you don't kill her is removing her mount. It's very strange.
Yeah. So you would also get a level if you defeat Auriel herself. And there was one other, I sort of lost it in my
notes. If you're lower than level 7 and you find the codicil and the poem about the Rime, you gain a level for that, which seems very bizarre because you're not supposed to be lower than 7. But
right, there you go.
Or maybe it's even if you are exactly 7. So you could get 1 to 3 levels here, depending how things go, but probably 2.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some other weird things about this, because when the characters go there, they may be going there for a variety of reasons at a variety of levels. They could be going as low as, say, 3rd level with the help of the awakened sperm whale that they can make friends with as part of the quests from other towns. And so you want to know what they're going for. If they go too soon and you don't want them to sort of ruin the surprise or get slaughtered too quickly, what you can do is you can let them explore the island, but as soon as some of the threats from the island are unleashed on them, like the 7 Yetis or the abominable Yeti, you can let them explore, get the lay of the land, but then drive them away, and hopefully they will understand, oh, we'll come back later for this. It's possible that they're coming to investigate the island, but have no idea about the codicil or the professor orb. In that case, if they go through it, they will probably find it anyway. But it may be the last thing on their mind. And to turn that on its head, they may be there just for the codicil and the orb and not even realize that they could defeat Oriel here. So you could be going in with a lot of different goals and a lot of different avenues for running the game, creating the story. So it's important to keep that in mind and maybe just adjust things slightly depending on what the characters are actually going to do.
Yeah, and it's maybe worth talking about how you can get here before we talk about Oriel herself. You can hitch a ride from the awakened sperm whale Angajuk. And this is all this chapter. So there's a section here on how to get there, and it covers 3 possibilities, right? Hitching a ride on the awakened sperm whale, booking passage at Revel's End, which is the prison from the Lord's Alliance, on a ship called the Ravenous, or you can borrow griffins from the Goliaths of Sky Tower Shelter. I really love that these are actually all fairly well supported. Like they have cool story ends, like, the prison ship is interesting. And so they give you some good support here. The thinnest one is probably borrowing griffins, because it just sort of assumes that you've either brokered peace, or what I find very bizarre is a Goliath has to speak to the chieftain on your behalf. And that Goliath rolls a persuasion check against a particular DC, and like having an NPC roll for you seems really weird. So I would just have it be your check.
Right.
But
Yeah.
But at least you get some good support on the different ways. The Griffin is also, you noted something strange about the Griffins.
Yeah, as if you take the fly in with the Griffins, the adventure says that the rock that Auriel uses to spread her curse comes out to fight you. And if that happens, and you, for some reason, the characters could easily defeat the rock, then the curse is done. And now the characters may not know that.
Right.
But
you won. You just don't even know it.
You don't even know you won. So I think Teos would agree that get rid of that whole "if you defeat the rock, the curse is done" thing. I think make them, or even make it interesting. The next day the sun comes up and everyone cheers, but then the next night it goes back away, and Auriel is seen riding a dragon.
Yeah, I mean, so we're gonna have to get into that, because the thing is, I think that this gets back to the premise and expectations. Is your characters want to end the rime. It is literally the name of the book. It's what they've been thirsting for all this time.
Yep.
And they're probably not going to buy into the premise that killing the rock ends these things. I don't buy into the premise.
No.
I'm reading the book. So they're going to want to think that you have to kill Auriel.
Mm-hmm. And
the thing about that is, and maybe this is where we talk about facing her, is that's hard. This is one case where you're looking at the stat blocks. You go, well, that's not that hard. But then you realize, well, there are 3 stat blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And so before we get into it is hard. It is a hard fight, a medium fight, and a medium fight back to back. But she has the tactics that, if you play it well, will draw this out much further and give her greater advantages, such as she'll almost act like multiple monsters each time. Mm-hmm. And she can even bring her rock into it.
Right.
And all of that means that this can be an unwinnable fight. And I think a DM that's run a lot of editions, has run a lot of boss fights, has some good expertise in this, knows how to handle their players' tactics. I'm pretty sure I could run this, for example, so that the players cannot win if they're 7th or 8th level.
Right.
I'll just be I will play her deity side too well and weaken them too much. And unless they get super lucky with 3 forms, they won't do it.
Right.
And so then the question is, if they're not going to defeat her, then what, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I would actually say is transfer the ability of the rime from dependent upon the rock to being dependent upon the codicil.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we have a reason why this codicil has an entire level of a dungeon to secure it.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
Because so, I think, and then you have something that players can go after. And if you tell them that, and there are a number of talking opportunities in this dungeon, then they have a reason to go, well, we don't actually have to fight her. Or if they got their butts kicked by her, they can say, we don't have to fight her. What else can we do? Oh, this is what else we could do.
Right.
We can take the codicil, which we need anyway.
Mm-hmm. And the professor orb comes in handy here, because it can act as your voice. UDM. It can act as your voice in telling the characters exactly what they did, what exactly they need to do, what exactly they failed to do, and make it seem a little more reasonable to fit the story you're telling.
I love things like the Professor Orb that allow you to have a DM voice that feels like an NPC, but it allows you to guide them one way or the other. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Especially in an adventure where there could be some confusion.
Yeah.
Right. It's not go right, go left. It's big plot points that you might need to reveal. Yeah. So once you get there, you arrive at the island, which is called the Island of Solstice. The island has been taken over by Auriel and provides some danger and some interesting NPCs in its own right, not even talking about the castle. So the island is made of mostly ice and snow, and it's shaped like a giant snowflake. At the end of each of the snowflake arms, there are docks that pose a threat to any ship trying to use them. And you may be coming in on a pirate ship, or a privateer ship, if you use the Ravenous as your means to get there. So While you're on the island, a few things change. The save DC to resist the effects of extreme cold is 15 instead of 10, since Oriel lives there. Um, if whenever a creature that lacks resistance or immunity to cold spends a hit die within 1 mile of the island, it only gets its Constitution modifier instead of being able to roll the die. So basically, all die rolls are 0.
Right.
And you only add your Constitution modifier to get hit points back.
And it has to be positive. The minimum is actually 0. So
Mhm.
that's actually a pretty big deal,
Yep.
especially if you end up in a protracted Oriole fight.
Yeah.
The other thing to note here is I had to look this up. Cold weather gear, that doesn't that grant resistance to immunity to cold? Well, no, it actually qualifies as if you had it, but it doesn't grant it. So
Mhm.
you still are subject to this, even though you're wearing cold weather gear for
Which,
once.
which is good. Thank you for pointing
Yeah.
that out. And they're also the island is surrounded by fog out to a distance of 200 feet from the island. So until you're right into the island, and you really can't see what's going on, and that can hide, say, a rock flying toward you.
Yeah.
Uh, once you,
The
oh, go
adventure
ahead.
guidance, just going to say the adventure guidance is basically to go to this one particular giant sized dock and climb your way up it. So
Yep.
sort of whichever way they approach, you're kind of, you end up ending at the same side of the island, which is great. I have no problem with that.
Yep. And speaking of a voice of the DM, once they arrive at the dock or once they arrive on the island somewhere, an ice mephit named Sapo offers help in the form of guidance. And help is in quotation marks because basically it's there to show the characters all the cool things on the island and then have the island kill them. And it wants to watch. It doesn't speak common. It only speaks Aquan and Orin, but why put this on there unless you're going to allow it to be used? So
Yeah.
let Sapo do its thing.
Yeah, let it speak common because that's just too much fun to have the
Right.
torture going on.
Right. So then for all these other areas on the island that we're talking about, Sapo can take them to and say, oh, look at the shipwrecks. Look at there's a dead body here. Oh, look at these statues. Look at this garden. So let's talk about each. The shipwrecks. Around each of the docks, there's a shipwreck that can be investigated if the characters are willing to go underwater in this frigid area. And there's a table that has different things they might see in the shipwreck, from monsters to treasure to just some cool looking things. And did you want to say anything about the shipwrecks, or do you?
No, I think that's
Okay.
fine. I mean, it's lean design, but
Yep.
there's a lot here, so that it makes sense.
Cool. The next area is Nas Lantimir's ghost. So Nas Lantimir was a diviner sent by the Arcane Brotherhood to search for these treasures. She's the one who brings the Professor Orb with her.
Yeah, she stole it from Valine.
Exactly. Nas died after her ship wrecked and she swam to shore. Now her ghost, though, so her body is frozen and her hand is just sticking up out of the snow. But her familiar, a weasel, has sort of bonded with her ghost. So he has remained alive.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So, what's interesting about this is I love the setup, and the first person to touch the orb, the ghost is going to try to possess them, which will then try to argue against Valine, hates Valine, and wants you to regain things. But the ghost is actually going to die if you regain the codicil, because then its goal is fulfilled. But it doesn't act that way. It just wants the codicil.
Yeah.
Regardless of being, then finally let to die. The weasel will then at that point die too. But I think this is a neat story angle. It's a nice way to counter Valine. And if you don't have Valine, then this becomes your dual guides. The ghost possessing you and the orb, Professor Orb, become your DM voice and your guides towards understanding what possibilities they have here in this place. So it isn't necessarily an easy spot to find. So I would either route the characters this way or move this to be along their path, because I would not want to skip this in a run of this adventure.
True. And there are also an area with ice statues, which Auril creates in her free time. And they're very nice ice statues. If the characters break them, then Auril tries to curse them. And if she curses them, they become vulnerable to cold while they're on the island. And she also summons the abominable Yeti to track them down and kill them.
So vulnerability to cold will be a huge, huge deal for any characters facing Oriel later. She does a lot of cold damage, and in a lot of ways, kind of constantly, and it's often sort of small ticks of damage. But when you double small damage, it becomes big damage very quickly, and especially sustaining over time all that vulnerability will be huge. So if you have a party that loves to smash stuff and is very strong, you should take them to the ice statues so that they are kind of brought back down to a controllable level. Because and on the other hand, if your party is very weak, you maybe don't want to push them towards the destruction of ice statues, because that might be too much for them.
And the text says if you are already invulnerable or resistant to cold damage, then this curse doesn't affect you. If your party's strong, I would change that. If they fail that saving throw to be cursed, take them from immune to vulnerable. Take them from vulnerable to normal, or take them from normal to vulnerable.
Right.
Because that's something. This is the goddess of cold.
Yeah.
If she wants to overcome something, I think she should be able to. Yeah. This is her sphere. She can control her sphere. So. There are also Yeti caves, no big deal. One Yeti in each of these 7 caves, and they can be summoned to all together to come after the characters. Then there's the Garden of Death, where if a creature dies of exposure to the cold, they're brought here and placed in this garden. And there's an ice troll who broke in for a quick snack on some of the frozen corpses. So he's not too difficult to defeat. And if you eat his heart, it will give you regeneration. And if you use his heart to create a potion, it can become a potion of cold resistance.
Yep, which is pretty nice for someone who's needs to be buffed up against all that cold damage coming up.
Yep. And here's a tip. Just if you're creating something, and if you're creating a map and you're labeling it, and you do like area A2, area B4, area C12, don't use I as the first letter of that designation, because it looks like a 1. And then you're looking at like area 11. Wait, no, there's no area 11. Area 13? What? Oh, it's I3. When you're looking at it, especially if you don't have good eyesight like I don't, it looks like area 13 and you're scrounging around in the why is it starting at 11? where I missed 1 through 10. Oh wait, no, that's an I.
It's a good tip. I got to remember that.
Yep. All right, so finally we get to the castle itself, called Grimskull.
Grayskull, right? Grayskull?
Grayskull, yes.
By the power of Grimskull.
Yeah.
There is this great piece of art that when you look at it, you realize it really is Castle Grayskull.
Yep, the art is amazing. It does look like a big skull sitting on top of this mound of ice. And I love the maps here. I think all of the snowflake themes are perfect. Grimskull was a castle constructed for a frost queen giant named Vasa Viken. And it's filled with remnants of her reign, including her corpse. Auril claimed it as her own. Now, so when you're going through, remember that this is a fortress built for giant-sized creatures. So when you give descriptions, reinforce that. The stairs are all huge, and it's a difficult terrain to climb it because it's awkward. There are no lights inside. Everything inside uses dark vision, which we kind of talked about last time. Yeah. Just to open a door is a DC 20 athletics check, strength athletics check. That not locked, just to open it. And there are 4 levels. There's the entry level, there is the palace level, the battlement level, and the dungeon level. And the entry level is where characters come in. Then it goes up to the palace level and the battlement, or down to the dungeon. Yeah. And we're not going to go through every room, because there are many that just don't have anything interesting in them, or some standard things that don't really need calling out. But we'll talk about anything that we think is important. Do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So the entrance level, there's not a lot here except for an old frost giant guard. He has a bunch of information he can provide and only wants an honorable death. And I love this. This is such cool inclusion. I would really play up his age, make it very obvious how he's just, trying to die honorably so that PCs will want to capture him or knock him out or whatever and interrogate him because he's a neat character that can actually provide them with very important information that you kind of want the PCs to know.
Yeah. I found it strange that one of the things that almost every adventure does well, because it's the first thing that you as the designer do, is describe the doors.
Yeah.
And they show the doors on the map, but they don't say, this portal is big and it has pictures of giants. It's just nothing. It doesn't describe them at all, which I thought it's not bad. It's just weird. It's just different.
Yeah, just the front door. Yeah.
So the rest of the entry level is pretty nondescript. You can go up to the palace level or down to the dungeon from there. So let's go up to the palace level. There are really two areas in the palace level. One is the throne room. On the ceiling are icicle piercers. Very cool. I thought that was cool. Nice example of using a creature but just repurposing it to capture the theme, which is great design. And the other area is called Aurel's Sanctuary. Now, Aurel might be here, so keep that in mind. And there are stairs.
Daytime, she's here.
Right. There are stairs ascending then to the battlement level. And that's the important point that we probably didn't mention and should. Aurel essentially is a 50-50 chance she's here. If it's during the day, she's here. If it's at night, she's out renewing her curse, which she does every night. So again, it's probably a choice that you as the DM are going to have to make or ask the characters, do you want to go during the day or do you want to arrive at night?
Yep. And near the area, near where we are here talking about, near her room and throne room, is an area where you have 6 ice methods. And I mentioned that because that can coincide with some of the powers of Aurel if she calls to them or goes and gets them and attacks. So it's worth keeping in mind that they don't attack you on sight. So the party would probably just leave them there because they just sort of watch you. But then they can come and figure in round 2 of the fight. So
or act as her eyes, maybe, if you want to go that route. They could be spies for her.
Though she has a legendary ability or layer action that she can take at any time, which outside of combat is fine, to know where every creature that is living is and how healthy they are. So think of her as always knowing when something gets wounded,
right, and
where something is, which is pretty interesting. So she can kind of do that a fair bit. One thing about this throne room, upper palace level is it just... like, I know she's into solitude, but there's sort of nothing going on here. And it's a bit too empty for my taste. Like, I wish there was some touch of her personality here or something like that would give me something that I could give the players to, a little more, especially because when we look at her stat block, we're given that she does not role play much so as to sort of act special and distant and divine. Mm-hmm. So there's little to give about her personality here.
And that's another good point that I thought about but didn't write down is at this point, the players have no knowledge of what Aurel is. They may know it's Aurel, but they don't know that she's not a goddess, full goddess at this point.
True.
So, if they're going through this place, they could probably think if we run into her, she's just going to crush us unless we appease her or talk to her or do something. So here is where you want to give those clues that she is semi-mortal now. She can be killed. It won't be easy, but that she could do it. And where better to do that than the bedroom, right? The place where the place where she lives. She has a bed. Well, why does a goddess need a bed? Well, because she has to sleep because she's mortal. I mean, you can make up whatever. Give those clues that allow the players to know the information they need to know to make choices.
And I would say that to me, things that stand out as personality of hers that I would want to communicate, historically, after events that took place, the gods have taken themselves out of being heavily involved in the Forgotten Realms. Mm-hmm. That's a big historic change. and she's basically one of the first goddesses to kind of disobey that edict and to reinsert herself into it, but she's given away much of her divinity to pull that off. Right. And that sacrifice is very much along her teachings, right, of hardship and perseverance and cruelty and so there's just some really great aspects that I wish there was an easier way for players to provide, but you'll have to improvise on your DMs to provide. You'll have to improvise how you do that and how you get that across. And there could have been something here that would have communicated that really well, which would especially be awesome if they come during the night and she's gone, but to find sort of what she's given up to do this, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, because why is she here? She's here because the other gods were, took her toys, right?
Yeah.
Who
forced her to the north.
Umberly
and
oh yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
So three evil gods, and they sort of took her domain, and Umberly ruled the sea and didn't like her, and so on. And so they kind of pushed her away, and then
So that can be expressed in some way. Whether you want to just, if your players would appreciate you just to tell it in book, a diary form, or
the professor could be rattling it off while you're fighting, even, or
or any of those things that complete the story for the characters.
Yeah.
Or, like I said, give them the ability, the information they need to tell their own story and make their own choices.
Yeah, and either Valine or the Nas, the ghost that could be with you, they are cold enough, so to speak, characters, right? They're dark, grim characters that aren't goody two shoes. They could also have an appreciation for what Oriel has done, and communicate that in a way that would be quite, off-putting to the players to hear, like, oh, this is how she thinks, right? This is what she's done. So if you go up, you end up at where the battlements and Oriel's rock named Iskra is here. It's worth noting that a rock is, a hard fight for level 7 for 5 level 7 characters. The biggest thing it does is it has 248 hit points, and it deals strong damage. It can do it very accurate, can reliably deal 50 points of damage to one or two, spread it across one or two targets. That's a lot of damage in a round to inflict. So it is a heavy hitter, but that's all it does. If it's gone, or if you've defeated it, you can search its nest, and there's some kind of fun stuff there, including what can I find there, Sean?
What would be the last thing? How about a silver dragon egg?
Yeah, I didn't expect that.
How did I don't even want to know. But hey,
and it will hatch in 3 to 10 days.
Yeah, and hey, you know what? Oriel could ride if the
I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, she would have to use magic to make it grow up faster, probably. Sure. But there you go.
But she's a goddess, so
There you go. Yep. So
that's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, that's everything above the dungeon. So the last 13 rooms from room 10 to 23 are below. And this is where the codicil is, and this is where a great deal of the action takes place. The first area that the characters come into is called the ice rink. There is an awakened giant walrus playing here, and it was made to guard the place, but it just sort of wants to play. So if the characters don't just rush in and kill this awakened walrus the size of an elephant, they can role play with it instead of fight it, and it can provide them information on what the different areas down here mean. Another area is called Vasavikin's Tomb. This is the frost giant queen who the castle was dedicated to. Now, she's enclosed in a block of ice. If the characters mess around and get to the body within the ice, Thrym, the god of the frost giants, intervenes and springs a trap on them.
Yeah, that's pretty mean. But I mean, you got to know that you're not supposed to mess with that. So
yeah, you would.
It's very fitting.
Yep. I'm going to let you talk about the 4 tests.
So I'm going to do this quickly because they basically, it's sort of a little bit, I find all of this a little, and I'm generally good about recover the 3 pieces of the whatever and put them in together. That's the bottom level of the dungeon has some sort of puzzle thing, and you got to do all these things and collect the bits. But this one actually, it's so big
Yeah.
and so prominent that it didn't make sense story wise. Like if the codicil was a bigger deal to Auril, had a bigger theme with the Rime, it would make sense. And that's why it made me think of like, well, if this was what empowers the Rime,
Mm-hmm.
it would make more sense to have so much to it. But basically, you have to go to 4 different areas. When you open these doors, you're transported to one of the Reged tribes. And I wish there'd been more seeds with that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I would kind of say, if you haven't started running it, this is a thing to put in there, to have the Reged tribe say, Oriel comes to us. She sends us people. Because apparently this is like a test that the Frostmaiden gives people periodically, including her druids. And when you go through one of these, you end up at a particular Reged barbarian tribe. And you have to do a thing that's themed: a test of cruelty, a test of endurance, test of isolation, test of preservation. They are fairly open, and I kind of like that, but they're a little, they may, depending on your style, you may want to change them. Like the test of cruelty is, we're running out of food, so it's time to eat the old people.
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to kind of either murder the old guys, which is what the chieftain asks you to do, or just allow it. And so long as you don't stop it, you win. And that may not, it's not my type of game. Maybe it's your type of game. That's totally cool. I'm not judging, but you may want to change that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And all the tests, I agree. All the tests seem to be this: we're here, we finally made it to this place, now we're going to be transported elsewhere. It just seems a little much. And even doing it once might be okay, but doing it 4 times seems a little bit over the top to me.
Yeah, I don't think it quite hits the desired tone. I see what it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it can be fun. One of the things that I would look at doing is this. One of the things that I find strange is it feels like it's real. Like if a chieftain has died, the chieftain won't be there. So it's like it's real, like you're really going there. And it sort of suggests that.
Right.
But I wonder if it isn't better to make it not real. And this could be an opportunity when each of these tests, choose a character, choose something they've done, and play off of that, either by rebuilding this scene or injecting that into it. So if a character has a secret, you can make that really a strong part of this. If they've had a particular accomplishment, have that show up in some way. But just something to personalize it and make it more interesting to the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then just tone it down as needed.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because you can really reinforce story, narrative, by doing something like Teos just described, by going back to a scene that's already played and touch on cruelty, endurance, isolation, and preservation. And not only is it cool in terms of it's a test, and if you pass the test, you can walk into this final chamber and find the codicil. It reinforces the story, and I think that's great.
There is a safe gap here. So the way you have to do it is one character must really succeed at one test. And as long as you have 4 different test successes and everybody's gathered, you can open the door. Or if one person has done all 4, they can open the door. If you fail, some druids will come along and open the door for you. They've already done the test before.
Yeah.
That's fine. And then you get the codicil. The codicil has poems in it that are interesting and kind of tell you a little bit about what is going on. I don't know. What did you think about it?
Yeah, it's after the test, I was trying to get through the test, and I just sort of, I lost the narrative. I lost steam. I began to notice small things, like the box text for one of the areas mentions 3 tablets that you have to break and to get in, but there are actually 4, and that caused me, a bit of confusion. So they get through, they find the codicil, everything's great, and then they get the opportunity, once they find the codicil, to gain Auril's blessing, which was strange to me, in the sense that they may have already killed her, or she may know that they're breaking in, and maybe they killed her rock already. But because they did this, a character that passed all 4 tests or has one of the secrets can be given this blessing. And if they fail, they're turned into an ice statue. But if they succeed, they can cast Cone of Cold once per day. That's pretty beefy.
Very beefy.
At 7th level.
And I agree with you. It seems really weird. Like, Auril should be smart enough to know that you didn't deserve her blessing. It feels too close to her. Like, I totally buy this happening in like a temple of Auril off somewhere else.
Right.
But when literally she's here, I'm sorry. And it does say she can remove this blessing at any moment when she sees you, but it still felt a little.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's just a little rough around the edges.
Right. And if someone accepts this, knowing everything they know, just make it so they can't attack Auril. Or have to help her.
Renounce it.
Yeah. Right. Or try to help her if she's attacked. Because if you're going to accept her blessing, you are now a follower of Auril. Congratulations. I mean, it's kind of weird.
One thing I found also interesting is you get this codicil, and it has in it the Rime of the Frostmaiden, which appears in Appendix C, and it's a very cool poem. So it's neat, and there's a handout, so you can give that to your players. But this is, in theory, when Valine sees this, or if the Professor Orb, this is what they need to get to the city. And when you read it, you go, I don't know that it's telling me how. I thought I was getting like a spell to get there. Or, okay, somehow this is going to help me get into Yithrin, but I don't know how.
Right. Yeah.
So it can feel a little disappointing if the characters are on their own, I think. But I guess the Professor Orb would just have to say, no, this will work.
Right. Yeah. It's the connection between the different parts takes a lot of DM massaging to make sense. Not just make sense for the story that you're telling with your players, but make sense of the actual text in the book itself. So if they defeat Auril, if Auril dies after they kill all 3 of her forms, Grimskull collapses. At least the top 2 levels collapse onto the 3rd level. So the characters have 1 minute to escape. If they're in the dungeon, though, I guess they're okay. They're safe down there.
It's movie time, right? So it works regardless.
Exactly. And it's weird because if the everlasting rime ends, it ends the next day, the sun comes up. It really doesn't say here how it affects the 10 towns. You would think that the characters would, or at least the text would say what happens. Does something happen because of renewed hope? Do they have a celebration? Do they? I don't know. It seems like there should be a story consequence.
And I agree with you that here there is nothing, and there should be. There is a epilogue chapter at the end of the book.
Okay.
And it has a summer is coming section. I'm not saying this will make you happy in terms of like everything, but it does at least, say that normal seasonal weather returns, the sun rises above the horizon, flora and fauna begin to recover. Depending on how they fared against the Shardalan dragon in chapter 4, the people of 10 towns can look forward to warmer times once more. So it's sort of life resets.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have... It doesn't build on, like what the character, how it impacts the characters.
Right. Because it's not the end of the adventure yet.
No.
Right. That's the problem. You can solve the problem long before you complete the adventure. So it's just kind of strange.
Yeah. And you have to wonder how many characters and players even would not mentally say, I think I'm done now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, I'm going to hold this codicil and make sure the Arcane Brotherhood never gets it. Why do I want this lost city?
Yeah.
I have no ties to this lost city.
Right.
I think I have ended the adventure.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 10 towns and let's, run for speaker or, further help with the rebuilding, or surely that's where the story lies. But, and that's a hole in the plot, right? In the story that the motivation to go to Yithrin, I mean, some characters might have it because they love investigating things or something, or you just want a place to adventure, but...
Right. I mean, it's okay because there are many adventures that we're going because it's there. That's a completely fine way to run an adventure and a fine motivation for certain characters and certain players. But if it's part of an ongoing story, you want that story to be continued, not just, okay, this is done now, this is sort of the next thing, because there's no compelling reason to make that the next thing. So, and maybe there is, and maybe I'm just missing it. So there's that as well.
Now, what do you think, Sean, timing wise? Do we want to talk about defeating Oral? Do we want to do that next episode?
Why don't we talk about the actual fight with Oral herself next time, and then we'll get on with chapter 6.
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
So how'd you feel, just really quickly, kind of, how do you feel about this chapter? How's it resonate with you?
It's sort of like this whole adventure. This is a microcosm of the whole adventure. There are many, many cool parts. There are many ways that I really like certain aspects of it. As a whole, it's going to take a lot of work to pull together to make it a cool campaign for the players. Mm-hmm. It's going to take a lot to get a coherent story, a coherent narrative out of it, because it's put together sort of awkwardly. And I feel like the chapter itself is a microcosm of that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you?
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's a bit of a shame because I love so much of it, and certainly all of the visuals. This is like a beautiful movie I want to see made. Mm-hmm. You know, like this star, this snowflake shaped island, this tower with the skull on it, the ancient frost giant area, all the places on the island, like everything's really cool. It just doesn't, the story, it gets lost across the steps. Yeah. And I wish there'd been a little more work done to develop that story through to where it would give the actions of the PCs import, and make them feel like they're truly on a heroic story. Instead, it feels like a series of episodes or a series of movies that are tangentially related, and yet there could have been these links. There are all these pieces that could have linked Oral throughout everything, but Oral just gets kind of thrown into us really kind of unexpectedly in this chapter. Like, we don't think we're going to go fight Oral, and we may not know we're going to fight Oral even until we're on this island, and then we do, and then we're like, wait, are we done? Yeah, but we're not done because there's other piece, and that did not have to be, right. And so it's a shame because. Yeah. I'm still mulling over how, because I'm fairly sure I will run this because I do like a lot of it, but I will have to dissect. I have to work through what I will do with that story here, because I want something bigger and more connected.
Yeah, what's interesting for me now is I am actually going to be playing in a campaign using this adventure, and so I'm honestly really looking forward to seeing what the DM does.
Yeah.
Right? How the DM pulls this together, because this is not a great adventure for new and experienced or DMs that don't have a lot of time to do things. But for a DM that likes to make a story work for their players, this is a good exercise for those DMs to be able to manage all these pieces and pull them together if they can do it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how our DM does it.
That's cool. That's neat.
But we will talk more Oriel next time. And until then, thank you so much for listening to Mastering Dungeons, letting Teos and I come into your lives a little bit once a week. Thank you especially to our listeners and our patrons. So if you would like to be a patron of the show, you can support us by going to patreon.com/MMP. where you are supporting not just us, but 2 other shows on the Misdirected Mark podcasting network.
And can I say, Sean, that just today I saw that Richard Green joined us as a patron supporter. Thank you, Richard Green.
I saw that. He did it, and I didn't get a chance to put it in the notes, but thank you so much. And I believe Mike Olson also became a patron, so thank you, Mike, as well. And Teos, if people want to talk to you, where can they find you?
I can be found on Twitter at AlphaStream. I can be found on our forums, and I blog at alphastream.org.
And you can find me on Twitter at Sean Merwin, or on those aforementioned forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. And now you can follow the podcast on Twitter at MasteringDND. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Teos, what should we do now?
We're going to go die to Oral, probably around Form 2 is what I'm thinking, but we'll figure that out next week.
That doesn't sound like fun.
I mean, it might be for the DM.
True.
Maybe.